Caldris IX had once been a world of industry, its orbital pathways heavy with transport craft, cargo haulers, and the endless traffic of Adeptus Mechanicus supply fleets. From the void, 1,000 forges had lit the planet's surface like a web of fire, each manufactorum a living organ of the Imperium's eternal machine. But when the Imperial cutter Saint's Mercy entered the Caldris system, silence greeted them. The void lanes were empty. The Vox was nothing but static. No orbital defense platforms sent their challenges. No transponder codes lit the Auspex. The world itself, Caldris IX, spun silently beneath the cutter's prow, half-shrouded in a pall of ash storms that spiraled upward into the thin atmosphere like wounds left to fester. Captain Leant stood upon the bridge, his hands tight upon the brass railing as he stared through the viewport. His knuckles had gone white, though he would not admit fear before his crew. "Machine spirits are uneasy," muttered the ship's engine seer, his vox filter hissing. His mechadendrites clicked nervously, their sensor nodes twitching like insects. "The forges should speak ye, the song of industry is gone. This is unholy." The captain ignored him, though the unease gnawed at his own soul. Worlds like Caldris IX did not simply fall silent. These were not agri-worlds or forgotten frontier colonies. This was a forge world bonded to the Mechanicus, a linchpin in the endless war effort. A place like Caldris was never dark, never quiet. And yet, nothing. No beacons, no hymns of the machine priests rising from the manufactoria, not even the hum of orbital engines in the void. The last Vox message. It was not entirely true that nothing had escaped the world. The cutter's astropath, a gaunt man whose eyes were burned away long ago, convulsed in his restraining throne as they entered orbit. His mouth frothed blood, his body thrashed, as though his soul were being torn out and pulled into the warp. When at last the spasms ended, the astropath croaked words in a broken, metallic whisper. "The saint walks, the saint hungers." Then he died. The bridge fell silent. Even the servitors, mindless things of flesh and wire, seemed to hesitate, their cogitators humming with static. Captain Leant swallowed hard, trying to ignore the cold sweat trickling down his spine. The astropath's death was not simply misfortune, it was omen. And everyone on the bridge knew it. The world below. Caldris IX was a world of fire and smoke. Its surface was scarred with manufactoria hives, each the size of a continent, their spires clawing into the clouds. Oceans had long ago boiled away, replaced by slag pits and rivers of molten runoff. Yet now the surface appeared darker than any record had shown. Whole sectors lay dead. Manufactoria, once blazing with furnace light, now stood cold. Ash covered the land in dunes, piled high against the broken shells of fallen chimneys and rusted cranes. Only faint glimmers of light moved across the continents, not the ordered brilliance of forges, but something irregular, flickering, like fire carried by processions in the dark. From orbit, it seemed less like a planet of industry and more like a funeral pyre in slow collapse. It was not the cutter's place to act. Captain Leant's ship was but a courier, a humble servant of the Imperium, yet he had carried passengers of weight, and now their time had come. The doors of the bridge hissed open, and all fell silent as Inquisitor Seraphine entered. Clad in black armor traced with gold sigils, her face half hidden by a rebreather mask, she radiated a presence that filled the chamber with iron weight. In one hand she carried a Rosarius, its light pulsing faintly like a heartbeat. In the other, a data slate covered in the runes of her seal. Behind her walked her retinue. Deathwatch Brother Castor, clad in black ceramite, bolted maglock to his chest. Magos Uryx, his human form barely visible beneath layers of augmetics, mechadendrites whispering as if hungry for secrets. A silent assassin of the Officio Assassinorum, her pale face hidden beneath a hood. The crew bowed their heads instinctively, some whispered prayers. Seraphine stepped to the viewport, gazing down at Caldris IX. Her voice was calm, cold as stone. The silence of a forged world is not absence, it is blasphemy. The Omnissiah's song does not end without cause. She turned to Captain Leonce. You will take us down. The captain hesitated, his lips trembled. Inquisitor, forgive me, but the world is silent, which is why I must hear its voice. Her gaze pierced him like a blade. Take us down, or I will have another wear your uniform before the day is out. Leonce bowed low, fear choking him. As you command. The cutter shuddered as it entered atmosphere. Ash storms battered the hull, scouring it with black dust. Lightning cracked across the clouds, illuminating towers below that stood like broken teeth. Through the storm, they glimpsed Manufactoria spires, their windows shattered, their gantries twisted into skeletal forms. Some towers had collapsed entirely, lying like corpses across the earth. The only light came from below, fires burning in circles, processions of robed figures carrying torches through the ruins. Their chants rose faintly through vox pickups, distorted by static. Magos Uryx adjusted his implants, his voice a metallic hiss. There is no logic in this silence. Forged worlds do not fall. Their machine spirits cannot be extinguished by chance. Something wills this. The Inquisitor's eyes narrowed. Then we will unmask that will. As the cutter descended toward a landing zone, a broken Manufactorum plaza, the crew began to hear it. A sound beneath the storm. Low, metallic, rhythmic. Footsteps, like the tread of titanic engines, echoing across the planet. And beneath it, a voice, deep and resonant, carried on the wind. A prayer. Iron is faith, faith is fire, fire is purity, purity is blood, blood feeds the saint walks, the saint hungers. The cutter touched down amid ruins. Ash swirled across the landing zone, clinging to armor and robes alike. The air stank of rust and burned oil. Deathwatch Brother Castor was the first to step down the ramp, bolter raised, helmet lenses scanning the shadows. His voice growled through Vox. No signs of life, no Vox traffic. This world is dead. But he was wrong. From the edges of the plaza, figures emerged. Dozens at first, then hundreds. Hooded, robed, their faces hidden by iron masks bolted to their flesh. Their bodies bore crude augmentations, metal arms, fused plating, wires that dug into skin like thorns. Each carried a torch or chains dragging across the ground or rusted blades slick with oil. They formed a circle around the cutter, their chanting rising as one. The saint walks, the saint hungers. Magos Uryx's eyes flickered red. These are no servants of the Omnissiah. These are Heotech constructs. They should not exist. Inquisitor Seraphine stepped forward, her rosarius blazing with holy light. They exist because someone has given them purpose. We will find that hand and sever it. The chanting grew louder. The torchlight burned brighter. And then, from the distant streets, the sound came again. The footsteps, each one a quake, each one rattling the ash from the Manufactorum towers. The masked figures fell to their knees as the earth shook. They pressed their iron masks into the dirt, voices breaking into screams of worship. And in the stormlit distance, through the falling ash, a shape began to emerge. Towering, human-shaped, but vast, far larger than any man. Its body was a cathedral of steel and fire, its head crowned with spires, its arms ending in weapons forged from sanctified engines. Brazier flames burned across its frame, casting it as both saint and monster. Its voice rolled across the city like thunder. The saint walks. The saint hungers. The Iron Saint had come. Ash fell like snow as the retinue of Inquisitor Seraphine disembarked fully, their boots crunching over the slag and rusted debris. The plaza stretched wide around them, the skeletal remains of Manufactoria towers looming like tombstones in the haze. The masked figures, the torchbearers, remained on their knees, circling the cutter in silent reverence, their iron masks pressed to the ash. Their bodies trembled as though the earth itself were alive beneath them. Some whispered fragments of prayer, others simply keened like broken machines. Caster of the Death Watch stood at the vanguard, bolter raised, every movement measured. His gene-forged senses tracked the sound of the colossal footsteps, still echoing from the distance, measuring intervals, calculating approach. They kneel to it, he growled. This saint of theirs, they think it divine. They are not wrong, said Magos Urix in a whispering chorus of vox stones. Divinity and machine are indivisible. A weapon of this magnitude, born from flesh and steel, it is both heresy and revelation. His mechadendrites clicked hungrily, as though yearning to taste the data of the abomination. Seraphine silenced them both with a raised hand. Her voice was calm, but beneath it thrummed steel. We move forward. The answers will not come to us. She strode into the circle of kneeling torchbearers, her retinue following in her shadow. Not one of the masked figures resisted. They only turned their heads, metal scraping against metal, following her with eyes none could see. As the Inquisitor passed beyond the plaza, the torchbearers rose as one. They moved silently, without command, forming lines behind her, flanking her retinue, torches held high. Their flames lit the ruined streets, throwing monstrous shadows across shattered arches and twisted gantries. What in the throne's name are they doing? Whispered Captain Leonce, who had dared to follow, laspistol shaking in his hand. They are leading us, Seraphine replied without turning, or perhaps delivering us. The torchbearer's chant began again, low at first, then rising with each step through the ruins. Iron is faith, faith is fire, fire is purity, purity is blood, blood feeds the saint walks, the saint hungers. It was no longer dozens of voices, now it was hundreds. The sound echoed through the city as more figures emerged from alleys, from shattered Manufactoria doors, from the ruins of hab blocks, all masked, all robed, all joining the procession. The street became a river of fire and iron. It was then that the first of the dead appeared. At first they seemed like statues, slumped against the sides of broken walls, ash piled against their forms. But as the torchlight fell across them, their heads lifted. Eyes glowed faintly from sockets, some augmetic, some burning with unnatural fire. Their bodies were skeletal with decay, yet bound with plates of iron and coils of wire. Servitors, or what once were servitors. The Mechanicus would have destroyed such failures. These, instead, had been repurposed. One shambled forward, dragging its broken limbs. Its vox grill crackled static, then twisted into words. The saint walks, the saint hungers. A chorus followed, dozens of them stirring from their ash thrones, their ruined frames creaking as they joined the procession. Leonce gagged. By the throne they're dead, all of them are dead. No, Seraphine said coldly, her eyes fixed forward. Worse, they are useful. The streets of the Manufactorum hive narrowed as the procession wound deeper into the city. Rusted chains swung overhead like banners, clattering in the ash wind. Great murals carved into the Manufactoria walls showed saints of the Mechanicus, venerable magi surrounded by cogs and flame. Yet each mural had been defaced, burned, or overlaid with crude imagery. Everywhere the same sigil repeated. A great iron halo surrounding a human form, arms outstretched like a messiah, its chest torn open to reveal gears in place of a heart. The cult has rewritten their creed, Magos Urix muttered, his lenses whirring. They have erased the Omnissiah. They worship instead this iron saint. Brother Castor spat the word like a curse. Idolatry, heresy, this world is beyond redemption. Perhaps, Seraphine replied, but even heresy has roots, we will find them. At last, the procession entered a vast courtyard, once a plaza before the grand Manufactorum Cathedral of Caldris IX. The structure loomed above them like a mountain of steel and stone. Its spires pierced the storm clouds, its great gates were carved from black iron, taller than titans. Chains thicker than a man's body wrapped the cathedral, crisscrossing it like restraints on a beast. They glowed faintly, symbols etched into their links, pulsating as though alive. The torchbearers spread out in the plaza, forming concentric circles. The chanting rose to a fever pitch, echoing off the cathedral walls until it seemed the stones themselves joined the hymn. Seraphine stopped before the gates. Her rosarius glowed brighter, as though reacting to the unholy aura. "This is it," she said softly, "the heart of their faith." Without warning, the gates of the cathedral groaned and split apart, opening slowly. The sound was not mechanical, it was organic, like the grinding of bone. Darkness spilled from within, not simple absence of light, but a weight, a suffocating pressure that pressed against the soul. The torchlight dimmed, the chanting faltered into whispers. Seraphine felt it first, a pressure in her skull, like claws dragging across her mind. Her vision blurred, and in its place came images. She saw a colossus striding across Caldris IX, its footsteps shaking the Manufactoria into rubble. She saw thousands of masked figures casting themselves into its path, crushed into paste beneath its feet. Yet their screams were not of fear, but ecstasy. She saw the chains of the cathedral glowing brighter, tightening as if straining to hold back what dwelled within. And she heard the voice again. "The saint walks. The saint hungers." She tore herself free with a gasp, falling to one knee. Her retinue had fared no better, even Castor staggered, his transhuman mind scarred by the weight of the vision. Lience was on the ground, vomiting blood. Only the torchbearers seemed unharmed. They knelt, their voices rising once more, joyous, fevered. "The saint walks, the saint hungers, the saint is risen." From the darkness of the cathedral, something stirred. Not the Iron Saint itself, not yet, but a fragment, a herald. It stepped into the torchlight, and the world seemed to shudder at its presence. It was man-shaped, but immense, nearly thrice the height of Castor. Its body was a fusion of flesh and machine, rusted armor fused to bone, weapons grafted into its arms. Its face was hidden behind an iron mask shaped like a saint's visage, though cracked and weeping oil. Chains hung from its shoulders, dragging across the ground. In one hand, it carried a weapon, once a Mechanicus staff, now twisted into a spear crowned with burning coals. It raised the weapon high, and the torchbearers fell prostrate, screaming in worship. The herald, Magos Urix whispered, or trembling in his vox, "A shard of the saint, a vessel of its will." The herald's voice boomed, like thunder carried through a cathedral. "The saint walks. The saint hungers." It pointed its spear at Seraphine. And the chains, binding the cathedral, shuddered. The courtyard before the Cathedral of Chains became a tomb of silence. Only the whisper of ash across the stones, the hiss of burning torches, and the booming voice of the herald remained. The giant stood framed in the cathedral's black gate, its rusted armor and fused flesh glistening with oil and blood. Its mask, a cracked parody of sanctity, wept rivulets of molten iron. The spear it carried pulsed with heat, as though it had been pulled fresh from the forges of Mars. Inquisitor Seraphane's voice cut across the silence, steady despite the iron weight pressing upon her. You wear the face of a saint, but you are no messenger of the God Emperor. You are heresy made flesh. The herald tilted its head, the chains across its back clattering like broken bells. Then, in a voice that shook the courtyard stones, it answered. The saint does not kneel to the emperor. The saint kneels to hunger, to fire, to blood. The torchbearers screamed in ecstasy, slamming their foreheads into the ash until blood spattered across their masks. Their chant rose into a fevered hymn. The saint walks, the saint hungers. Brother Castor raised his bolter, his voice a growl. Blasphemy ends here. And he fired. The first volley thundered through the courtyard, explosive shells streaking into the herald's chest. Each detonation spat fragments of rust and bone. The creature staggered, its iron mask snapping sideways, chains whipping as it regained balance. But it did not fall. It roared, the sound of furnace bellows blast, and hurled its spear. The weapon became a streak of fire through the ash storm, slamming into the ground where Castor had stood a heartbeat before. The impact split the plaza, stone cracking, molten light spilling from the fissure. Throne, blood, Lientz cried, stumbling backward, last pistol shaking uselessly in his hand. The torchbearers surged forward, not toward Castor, but toward the spear itself. Dozens of them threw themselves onto the weapon, flesh sizzling as the fire consumed them. Yet their sacrifice was not in vain. The weapon pulsed brighter, the molten cracks spreading wider, as though their deaths fed it. Magos Uryx's mechadendrites lashed wildly, his vox stuttered with excitement. It draws power from the faithful, their deaths fuel its divinity. Seraphane's eyes narrowed, then we sever its congregation. With a snap of her hand, she gave the order. The assassin moved first, a blur of pale motion, blades flashing in the dim light. Her movements were silent, surgical. One torchbearer fell, then three, then six, throats opening in sprays of ash and blood. Brother Castor followed, his bolter roaring in disciplined bursts, each round shredding masked figures into ruin. Their screams rose, not of fear but devotion, as if each death was an offering to the saint. Still they came, hundreds swarming the courtyard, their iron masks glowing red with reflected firelight, their chains rattling like serpents. Captain Lientz fired wildly into the crowd, panic overtaking discipline. His last bolts seared bodies, but for every heretic that fell, two more surged forward. Seraphane raised her Rosarius high. The icon's light blazed outward, a sphere of radiant power. Her voice rang like a blade. By the God Emperor's will, be unmade. The wave of sanctified energy ripped through the front lines of the torchbearers, their bodies igniting in holy fire. Screams turned to shrieks, then silence as ash consumed them. But with each death, the herald only grew stronger. The herald wrenched its spear from the earth with a sound like tearing metal. Flames trailed along the chains across its back. It strode forward, each step cracking the plaza stone. Brother Castor met it head-on. The Deathwatch Marine was a titan in his own right, his black armor gleaming with kill-mark sigils. His chainsword roared to life as he swung for the herald's chest. Steel met steel, sparks erupted in torrents. The impact rattled the cathedral gates. The herald struck back with its burning spear. Castor parried, the blade of his chainsword shrieking as it met molten iron. The heat blistered the ceramite, and Castor snarled as warning runes flared red across his visor. It was like fighting a living titan. Every blow from the herald sent shockwaves through the plaza. Stones shattered. Torchbearers were thrown aside like dolls. Chains whipped through the air, each strike shattering statues and smashing rubble into dust. Yet Castor held the line, his gene-forged body absorbing the punishment, his faith unshaken. "Die, abomination," he roared. The herald's only reply was laughter, hollow and metallic. As the duel raged, Seraphine turned her eyes to the cathedral. The chains binding its walls glowed brighter now, pulsing in rhythm with the herald's blows. Each strike of spear against sword sent a wave of power into the bindings, as though the herald's battle was the key to unlocking what lay within. Her blood ran cold. "The herald is not the saint," she whispered. "It is the herald only, the battle is the ritual." Magos Uryx's vox crackled, tones frantic. "If it continues, the cathedral will open, the saint will emerge, the planet will be consumed." Seraphine's gaze hardened. "Then we end the ritual." She raised her hand, chanting prayers of unmaking. Her rosarius pulsed brighter with each word, holy light searing against the darkness. The assassin darted forward, blades slashing not at the herald, but at the chains themselves. Each strike carved glowing gouges into the bindings, their unnatural symbols flickering. But the chains fought back. They moved as if alive, writhing like serpents, striking at the assassin with crushing force. One slammed her into the ground, bones snapping audibly. She coughed blood, but forced herself up, blades still slashing, carving another symbol away. "Mori," Seraphine commanded, "break their scripture." Uryx's mechadendrites surged forward, each tipped with plasma cutters and vibro tools. The Mechanicus priest screamed binary canticles as he worked, severing glyph after glyph from the chains. Sparks flew, molten metal spilling like blood. And with each broken glyph, the herald howled louder. Its strikes grew wilder, less controlled, its mask splitting further as molten tears poured forth. Brother Castor saw the shift. He pressed harder, chainsword carving deeper, bolter roaring in bursts between strikes. He leapt, driving his blade into the herald's shoulder. The chain teeth screeched, biting into rusted armor and fused bone. Oil and ichor sprayed across his armor. The herald staggered, bellowing, its spear lashing wildly. Castor ducked, then fired point-blank into its mask. The explosive shells detonated, cracking iron, shattering half the false saint's face. Behind the mask, Castor glimpsed it. A human skull, or what had once been human, stretched and fused to machinery, the flesh melted into slag. Its teeth clattered as it roared, molten flames spilling from its throat. "You are nothing," Castor spat, shoving the chainsaw deeper. But the herald laughed still. "The saint hungers, the saint will rise." As the last glyphs shattered, the cathedral of chains groaned. Its gates shuddered. The chains binding them writhed, snapping free, one by one. The earth shook. Ash poured from the sky in black sheets. The herald staggered, falling to one knee, its body unraveling as the bindings it was tied to broke apart. Its laughter turned to screams as its form cracked with molten fissures. But it was not dying. It was transforming. Brother Castor roared, driving his chainsword upward, splitting the herald's chest open. He fired another volley into its skull, shattering the mask entirely. The creature collapsed, chains rattling as its body crumbled into ruin. Its molten heart flickered and died. For a heartbeat, silence. Then the cathedral gates burst open. A blast of fire and ash engulfed the plaza, hurling torchbearers into the air, shattering statues into dust. The chanting ceased, replaced by a single sound. The footsteps. Deeper, louder, unstoppable. From the darkness within the cathedral, a shadow stirred. The Iron Saint itself was waking. The warband had shadowed the cult for days, weaving through the labyrinthine ruins of Caldris IX's hive fanes. Each night the chanting grew louder. Each morning, the city seemed to change. Manufactorums once dormant now belched smoke. Furnaces roared. Assembly lines clattered to life, with no human workers present. It was as if the hive itself was stirring from a long sleep. But it was not the hive, it was him. Inquisitor Seraphine and her companions crept into the heart of Manufactorum Obrax Delta. The ceilings stretched high above them, disappearing into shadow, rafters lined with rusted chains. Conveyor belts whirred, carrying half-finished constructs of steel and bone. On the walls, crude murals had been painted in ash and blood, depictions of a giant crowned with fire, his arms outstretched, as smaller human figures crawled toward him like supplicants. Magos Urix's vox grill crackled with static as he muttered. These machines should not be active. The power grids of Caldris were destroyed decades ago. Something else fuels them now. Brother Cordon of the Black Templars adjusted his grip on his bolter, his voice low and dangerous. I smell sorcery in this, or worse, the machine god's parody. Seraphine's eyes narrowed. No, not sorcery, faith, twisted but real. These people believe the saint walks among them, that belief has power, and power begets awakening. At the center of the Manufactorum stood a vast shape hidden beneath chains and shrouds of blackened cloth. Hundreds of cultists swarmed around it, climbing like ants, fastening relics of steel and bone to its frame. They hammered, welded, and chanted all at once, their voices merging with the clatter of machines. The warband crept closer. As the torchlight flickered across the form beneath the coverings, Seraphine's breath caught. It was no titan. It was no knight. It was something older, something personal, a war machine shaped not for battlefields, but for worship. Its form was humanoid, 2 arms, 2 legs, but stretched beyond proportion, its shoulders broad enough to carry cathedrals. From its back rose spires of steel adorned with burning censers. Its chest bore a cracked aquila overlaid with the cog of the Mechanicus. It was a walking church, a steel saint. And within its ribcage of iron, a faint red glow pulsed, steady as a heart. The cult fell silent. The Manufactorum itself seemed to hush. The only sound was the deep thrum, once, twice, thrice, reverberating through the floor. Dust fell from the rafters. Chains groaned. The black shrouds trembled. Then came a sound like 1,000 vox units screaming in unison. The air shook, deafening, a roar of distortion and pain that seemed to claw at the soul. The cultists fell prostrate, beating their foreheads against the steel floor until blood smeared their faces. The shrouds tore apart. The Iron Saint awoke. His head lifted first, steel jaws opening in a bellow of fire. His eyes burned white-hot, flooding the chamber with searing light. His arms flexed, tearing chains like cobwebs, raising hands the size of tanks into the air. Braziers upon his shoulders erupted into flame. The warband recoiled in horror. Brother Cordon hissed through his vox. That is no machine. That is a corpse entombed, given false divinity. That is blasphemy. Seraphine's face was pale, but her voice steady. No, that is worse. That is faith made iron. The saint's first words were not shouted. They were whispered, yet the whisper echoed through the Manufactorum as though the walls themselves carried his voice. I remember war. I remember the Emperor's light. Where is his light now? Why does the galaxy burn? The cult answered with a single deafening chant. Redeem us, redeem us, redeem us. The saint lowered his gaze to them, his colossal hand extended, fingers like spires of steel. He touched the altar at the Manufactorum center, where fresh blood still pooled. The blood hissed as it met his steel, vanishing into vents that glowed brighter in response. I hunger, the saint said. His voice grew louder, drowning out the cult's cries. Feed me faith, feed me flesh, feed me flame, for in these the Emperor walks. The cult erupted into frenzy. They tore at one another, offering blood willingly, screaming their devotion as they hurled themselves toward his feet. The saint devoured it all, their cries, their flesh, their very faith, and his frame grew brighter with each sacrifice. The inquisitorial warband could not remain hidden forever. A cultist stumbled too close, his wild eyes falling on Brother Cordan's black armor. He shrieked, pointing, and in seconds the warband was surrounded. Infidels, unbelievers, feed them to the saint. Bolt of fire roared as Cordan cut down the first wave, shells exploding bodies into bloody mist. Seraphane's plasma pistol sang, turning zealots into molten shadows against the walls. Mago's Urix unleashed arcs of lightning from his mechadendrites, sending dozens twitching to the floor. Yet for every cultist slain, more pressed forward screaming prayers, clawing with rusted blades and augmented limbs. They did not fear death, they welcomed it, believing each drop of blood was an offering to their saint. Above it all, the Iron Saint watched, his burning gaze locked not on the cult, but on Seraphane. You, his voice thundered, you carry his mark. Inquisitor, why do you hide in shadows when the Emperor calls you to kneel? The words froze the warband for a heartbeat. He knew her. The battle could not be contained. With a sound like collapsing mountains, the Iron Saint took his first true step. The floor shuddered, conveyor belts shattered, steel beams fell from the ceiling, crushing cultists beneath their weight, yet the zealots screamed praises even as they died. The saint raised his hand. Fire poured from the braziers upon his shoulders, cascading down like waterfalls of flame. Whole ranks of cultists were incinerated instantly, but the saint's gaze remained fixed on the intruders. He reached forward. A single hand descended, larger than a land raider, crushing machinery as it reached for Seraphane. Brother Cordan roared a battle cry, leaping forward with chainsword raised, striking at the fingers of the giant. Sparks flew as ceramite teeth ground against adamantine. The saint recoiled slightly, not in pain, but in curiosity. A Templar, he said, voice almost gentle. I remember you, warriors of faith. You should stand beside me, not against me. But Cordan spat his answer, driving his chainsword deeper. My faith serves only the true emperor, not this abomination. The saint's laughter shook the Manufactorum. Then you are blind, and I shall make you see. It became clear within moments that they could not kill him. Their weapons were gnats against his cathedral armor. Even Cordan's bolter shells left only scorched marks upon his steel skin. Seraphane shouted above the din. Fall back, now, we live today, or we all become offerings. Reluctantly, even the Black Templar obeyed. The warband cut a path through the screaming cultists, blood and fire marking their escape. Above them, the Iron Saint did not pursue immediately. He simply watched, his voice echoing after them as they fled into the ruins. Run if you must. The Emperor has shown me the truth. You will kneel, Inquisitor. All of you will kneel. From the shadows of the hive, Seraphane looked back. The Manufactorum was aflame, its windows glowing like the eyes of a furnace. The Iron Saint stood silhouetted within, arms raised high as his cult swarmed around him, chanting, bleeding, feeding him. The silence of Caldris IX was broken forever. The saint had awoken. The warband stumbled into the underhive, lungs burning with the reek of smoke and incense. Even there, far from Manufactorum Obrax Delta, the chants carried, "The saint walks, the saint hungers, the saint redeems." Seraphine leaned against a rusted pillar, helm removed, sweat streaking her face. Her eyes were hard, but her voice trembled. He knew me, he saw through the smoke, the distance, the battle, and he knew me by name. Brother Cordon stood like a black statue, Bolter cradled in his gauntlets, his gaze fixed back toward the glow on the horizon. He is no machine, machines do not know. He is a soul imprisoned, or worse, a corpse animated with false spirit. Magos Uryx's mechadendrites twitched as he spoke, his tone thick with reverence and dread. Neither soul nor corpse, both. A fusion of flesh and steel unlike any sanctioned rite, it is magnificent. Cordon rounded on him, voice a growl. Magnificent, it is blasphemy, you saw the altar, you saw what they fed it. Uryx did not deny it, his single glowing optic words softly. And yet, Brother Templar, blasphemy often hides truth. The saint recalls war, recalls the emperor. He is not a mindless engine, he is memory given form. Seraphine's eyes narrowed. Memory does not slaughter thousands to fuel its existence. They made camp in a derelict transit station. Broken rails stretched into darkness, trains long since rusted to skeletons. The stillness was broken only by the drip of water through cracks in the ceiling. Seraphine summoned Uryx to her side. "You know more than you have said, speak it now." The Magos was silent for a moment. Then, with a hiss of steam, he reached into the folds of his robe and produced a data slate. Its casing was old, embossed with the sigil of Caldris, ruling Mechanicum priesthood. "This is a record," he said, "of an experiment codenamed Project Redemptor. Centuries ago, during the Great Crusades of the Sector, the Forge Lords of Caldris sought to preserve their greatest generals beyond death. They built frames of war, not dreadnoughts, no, but vessels larger, more ornate, designed to inspire fear and devotion as much as to kill." He tapped the slate. A flickering hololith rose, showing the silhouette of a man being lowered into a steel cage. Spires of metal closed around him, wires burrowed into his flesh. The image shuddered, and then the man's scream filled the air. Uryx continued. They did not seek simple survival. They sought divinity. They wished to forge saints of iron, figures who could walk battlefields as living cathedrals, embodiments of faith and war. But the experiments failed. The subjects went mad, consumed by hunger for faith and flesh alike. The projects were buried. Brother Cordon spat on the ground. "And now one walks again. Tell me, Magos, was that failure, or was it success, waiting for this cursed age?" As they studied the data slate, a strange sound drifted through the transit station, singing. Not the raucous chants of zealots, but a single voice, low and broken. The warband crept to the platform's edge. There among the shadows, they found an old man. His robes were little more than rags, but upon his chest hung a cog-tooth pendant. His eyes were blind, yet he smiled as if he saw them clearly. "You have seen him, haven't you?" the old man asked. "The saint who walks." Seraphine crouched, her pistol hidden beneath her cloak. "We have, tell me what you know." The man's smile widened. He was once General Kalen, savior of Caldris during the Orc Wars. When he was mortally wounded, the priests offered him eternity. They built him a body of iron, filled with fire and faith. He accepted. He became our protector. His voice trembled with awe. But eternity is a cruel gift. His mind shattered. His hunger grew, they sealed him away. And yet, faith does not die. We remembered him, we prayed, and now our prayers have woken him. Cordan's jaw clenched. You prayed a monster back into being. The old man shook his head. No, we prayed a saint back into life. The monster is only what you see, but within him the general still lives. He suffers, yes, he weeps, but he fights for us as he always did. The warband fell silent. Even Seraphine, hardened inquisitor, felt the weight of the man's words. Could it be true? Was there truly a man's soul inside the towering machine? That night, arguments erupted. Brother Cordan was unyielding. The saint is corruption. Flesh and machine must not mix beyond what the emperor allows. I will see him destroyed, even if it takes a crusade. Urix countered with fervor. You saw his eyes, Templar. You heard his words. He remembers war. He remembers the emperor. Is that not proof of sanctity? Perhaps this is the future, man and machine united in eternal devotion. Seraphine cut them both short. Enough, we are not priests nor philosophers, we are hunters. What matters is that he exists, and he threatens not just Caldris, but the entire sector if left unchecked. Yet in her heart, she could not banish the thought. The saint had spoken with such conviction, such pain. He had not seemed a mindless beast. Perhaps he wanted release. The next day, the warband shadowed another cult procession. This one led not to a manufactorum, but to a cavern deep within the hive's foundations. There, before a crowd of hundreds, the saint knelt. For the first time, they saw the man within. Through cracks in his armor, where flame did not burn, pale flesh was visible. It was not dead flesh. It quivered, twitched, alive but scarred with wires and steel plating. A human chest, rising and falling. A face, hidden within layers of metal, eyes rolling with agony. And from that face, a human voice escaped, faint, broken, yet undeniably real. "And me." The cult did not hear. They only cheered louder, drowning his plea in their frenzy. But the warband heard. They heard every syllable. Cordan whispered, "The man still lives." Seraphine clenched her fists. "Yes, and he suffers every moment he does." The sight burned into them. The Iron Saint was not a machine alone. He was a prisoner, a soul trapped in a cathedral of steel, worshipped by those who could not hear his cries. That night, Seraphine spoke her judgment. We face not just a Heertech construct, nor just a cult. We face a tragedy. A man who once served the Emperor with honor, now enslaved by faith twisted into hunger. If we kill him outright, we risk martyring him. If we let him live, he will consume worlds. The only path is to free the man and destroy the saint in one blow. Urix objected, of course. You would cast aside centuries of Mechanicus craft, a miracle of flesh and steel unlike any in the Imperium. This is knowledge worth more than 100 worlds. Cordan's chainsword roared to life. Knowledge bought with heresy is corruption. The saint will die, and I will be his executioner. Seraphine silenced them both with a look. Not yet. First, we must find where his heart lies. Somewhere within that iron body beats the last fragment of Kaelin's humanity, and that is where we must strike. From then on, the warband watched him differently, not as a target, not as a god, but as a man shackled in iron. Every time he marched, they listened for the human voice beneath the thunder. Every time he devoured blood, they searched for hesitation, for signs of sorrow. And slowly, they began to see it. The saint's steps faltered sometimes, as if he resisted his own hunger. His prayers were often broken by words of regret. And in the brief silences, when the cult chanted too loudly to hear themselves, faint whispers slipped through his vox. "Emperor, forgive me." The warband's purpose crystallized. They would not merely destroy the Iron Saint. They would release the man within, granting him the Emperor's mercy at last. To do that, they needed to reach his core. And to reach his core, they would need to step into the furnace of his worship, into the heart of the cult itself. The saint was no longer just a threat, he was a mission. The first echoes of the Iron Saint's march began not with footsteps, but with a hymn of distortion, voxcasters coughing static-laced chants across the blasted ruins of Caldris IX. The sound was not one voice, but thousands, layered and broken, as if every throat on the world sang the same prayer through rusted pipes. At first, Inquisitor Seraphane thought it was the groan of the world's tectonic plates, the sound of dying forges. But then the tremors came. The earth itself shook in rhythm, each quake punctuated by a thunderous step. Dust cascaded from skeletal manufactorums, broken hab blocks rattled like bones, and the shattered spires of the forged temples swayed dangerously. From the horizon, the Iron Saint appeared. The Iron Saint was more than a war engine. He was a walking cathedral of damnation. His silhouette blotted out the weak sun, a titanic frame clad in iron spires and chain-laden plating. Each step crushed ferrocrete avenues into powder. His shoulders bore rusted braziers, vomiting black fire into the sky. Along his chest, once an armored plate of sacred engravings, living bodies were nailed in cruciform, their mouths sewn shut, yet their screams bled into the vox hymns. His head was a shrine, a hollow skull of bronze with eyes that burned in molten fury. Pipes trailed from his jaw like a mechanical beard hissing steam. His voice was the voice of a god machine carried on 1,000 vox channels. The Emperor's light walks within me. Kneel, blade, serve. Around him shuffled his congregation, the saints' zealots. They came in their thousands, humans reshaped by crude augmentation, their flesh stapled to rusted plates of scrap iron. Some dragged their intestines behind them, replaced with tubing that pumped promethium. Others carried braziers chained to their spines, their skin blistered by the fire. All of them chanted in a single, broken unity. Saint, 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 Iron Saint Eternal. At the head of the procession were the chains of devotion, zealots dragging massive, barbed chains, each link as large as a man's torso. They tore their backs bloody with every step, but never faltered. Behind them followed the choir of static, men and women whose throats had been grafted with vox speakers. They screamed machine prayers so loud that eardrums burst within earshot. The Iron Saint himself bore weapons as symbols of divinity. His right arm had been reforged into a colossal flail, a chain ending in a star of spinning iron blades, glowing with plasma heat. His left arm carried a shield, a slab of adamantium shaped into a Gothic archway, embossed with the cracked image of the Aquila. Each time he raised it, the zealots howled as if their god had blessed them. Wherever the saint passed, the broken manufactorums of Caldris IX awoke. Forges long thought dead stirred as though sensing their master. Smelters roared to life, belching molten steel into channels clogged with ash. Machine spirits, half-mad from centuries of neglect, screamed hymns in binary. But what they created was no longer holy. From assembly lines staggered war things of horror, constructs built from the corpses of the fallen. A man's torso nailed to tank treads, arms replaced by rotary cannons. Children's skulls used as cogitator cores. Broken servitors reanimated with jagged metal limbs, their eyes glowing a pale green. These machines bowed before the saint, and then turned their weapons on anything that did not kneel. From a shattered spire above, Inquisitor Seraphane and her companions watched the procession. Beside her, Deathwatch veteran Kalis adjusted the scope of his stalker bolter. "Emperor preserve us," he muttered, his gene-forged voice flat. "That thing, it walks like a titan, but there is flesh within." Seraphane's jaw tightened. She could feel the Iron Saint's presence pressing against her mind, like hot iron against skin. His voice was not only broadcast on Vox, it whispered through the Imperium, a prayer that scraped across the veil. "He is no titan," she said. "He is a man, bound and broken, a martyr twisted into a god machine, and his people love him for it." Magos Uryx's mechadendrites twitched with what seemed like awe. "Do you not see it, Inquisitor? The perfect unity of man and machine, a living god of steel. This is no heresy, this is evolution." Seraphine's hand hovered over her plasma pistol. For a moment, she considered silencing the Magos then and there, but the Saint's roar cut through her thoughts. The Iron Saint halted in the center of a ruined plaza once dedicated to the Omnissiah. Raising his shield high, he bellowed, "The Emperor's flesh has rotted, but his iron endures. The machine is eternal. Bleed for me, and I shall grant you absolution." At his command, the zealots surged forward. They dragged prisoners, ragged survivors of Caldris IX, onto an altar of scrap. With ritual precision, they impaled them upon hooks and funneled their blood into tubes feeding the saint's body. As the crimson ichor surged through his veins of iron, the saint shuddered with something like ecstasy. "Blood is oil, flesh is steel, faith is fire," he cried. The zealots roared in reply, pounding chains against the ground, creating a thunder that echoed across the city. Word of the Iron Saint's march spread like wildfire. Voxcasters carried his hymns across Caldris IX, drawing more survivors to his cause. Some joined willingly, desperate for protection. Others were captured, broken, and reforged. Every district he passed became a shrine of carnage. Forges spat out new monstrosities, streets filled with crucified corpses, and entire hab blocks were torn down to form effigies of the saint's image. His march was not a battle, it was a pilgrimage of conquest, remaking the world in his image. From their vantage, Seraphine clenched her teeth. "If we wait, his march will not stop until the entire Forge world bows," she said. "Then he will spread beyond Caldris IX. The segmentum itself will burn." Veteran Kalis chambered around. "Then we strike, cut off the head." But Magos Uryx hissed, his mechadendrites coiling. "No, to destroy him would be blasphemy. He is proof of what lies beyond the Omnissiah's silence. With control, with refinement, he could be our salvation." Seraphine turned to him, her eyes sharp as blades. "He is not salvation, Magos. He is damnation in iron." As the Iron Saint's flail struck the earth, splitting Ferrocrete in a shower of fire, the Inquisitor knew their next move would decide not only the fate of Caldris IX, but whether this Iron Saint would walk beyond his world. And the Saint marched on. The sky above Caldris IX split with fire. From orbit, sleek capsules pierced the ash clouds, Deathwatch drop pods, their hulls carved with purity seals and the sigils of the alien killers. Each pod roared through the atmosphere trailing burning contrails, the hymns of battle encoded into their machine spirits. The Iron Saint's procession halted as the sky screamed. His zealots looked upward, their mangled faces lit by streaks of fire. Some wailed prayers, others simply knelt, waiting for the judgment of their steel god. Then the pods struck. The first slammed into the plaza before the Saint, the impact cratering Ferrocrete and pulverizing zealots in a storm of debris. The petals of the pod burst outward, and Astartes in black armor strode forth. 10 warriors emerged, each a son of a different chapter, united beneath the sigil of the Silver Deathwatch. Veteran Kalis of the Ultramarines, his stalker bolter glowing with runes of hatred. Brother Malthor of the Space Wolves, chainaxe in one hand, storm shield in the other, his laughter a growl. Brother Ignatius of the Salamanders, flames licking across his drake-engraved armor. Brother Oros of the Blood Angels, his jump pack shrieking as he soared forward with a glaive. Each warrior bore relics of war honed for Zeno's killing, but now turned upon their fellow man, twisted into machine and faith. Deathwatch, Kalis roared, his voice amplified by Vox. By the throne's will, we cleanse this abomination. The zealots charged to meet them. The saints' followers were no mere rabble. Augmented with crude servitor implants, they surged like a tide of flesh and metal. Chains whipped through the air, claws of rusted iron raked at ceramite armor, and broken lasguns spat wild beams of energy. The Deathwatch answered with fire. Stalkerbolts tore zealots apart in sprays of meat and sparks. Flamestorm cannons roared, incinerating the choir of static in a wall of purifying flame. Maltha waded into the fray, his chain axe singing as it cleaved 3 zealots with every swing, blood spraying in crimson arcs across his wolf-pelted armor. But for every zealot felled, 2 more surged forward, dragged by faith and chains. The Iron Saint moved. His colossal flail swung in a wide arc, tearing through hab blocks as though they were parchment. The shockwave of the strike flattened dozens of his own zealots, but their deaths only fed the saint's hunger. Children of rust, bleed for me, he thundered, his voice shaking the plaza. The machine is eternal, and I am its prophet. The flail came down upon the Deathwatch. Kalis raised his bolter and fired, explosive rounds detonating along the weapon's chain, but they were gnats striking against a storm. The flail hit, and the ground fractured, hurling Astartes into the air. Brother Ignatius was caught in the blast, his armor shattering as he was driven into the ferrocrete with bone-crushing force. His flame sputtered out, his broken form smoking within his ruined helm. He bleeds like us, the saint roared. He dies like us. Oros of the Blood Angels ignited his jump pack, soaring upward toward the saint's chest. His glaive burned with a power field as he struck, carving deep into the nailed corpses upon the saint's armor. Sparks and blood erupted, and for a moment the machine god howled in pain. But the saint's shield swung upward, a cathedral arch of adamantium. It struck Oros mid-flight, shattering his body against the ferrocrete with such force that the plaza cracked for dozens of meters. His glaive clattered away, its power field dying with him. Still, the Deathwatch did not falter. Bolters roared again, Kraken rounds slamming into the saint's legs. Maltha and Kalis coordinated, striking in unison, each round exploding deep into pistons and steel sinew. For the first time, the saints stumbled. From the surrounding ruins, the manufactorums vomited forth their creations. Crawling, shuddering constructs of flesh and machine poured into the plaza, men grafted to tank hulls, quadrupeds with human faces, shrieking in binary and agony. Their weapons lit the air, a storm of rotary fire and las beams. The Deathwatch turned to meet them. Maltha's laughter became a howl as he carved through a construct of spidery limbs. Kalis knelt, his stalker bolter precision killing the monstrosities before they could bring their fire to bear. But the numbers were endless. The manufactorums birthed more with every moment, as if the saints' march had awakened the world itself into blasphemous creation. The Iron Saint raised his shield, and for a moment the battlefield froze. The cracked aquila upon its face glowed, molten veins of red searing across its surface. With a roar, the saint slammed the shield into the ground. A wave of force exploded outward, a storm of iron and fire. Zealots were reduced to red mist, constructs shattered into piles of steel and gore, and the Deathwatch were hurled like ragdolls. Kalis struck a broken statue, his armor splitting at the pauldrons. Blood filled his mouth, but he rose. He had no choice. They all had no choice. By the throne, he gasped, this thing will not fall by bolter alone. From above, Inquisitor Seraphine watched. Her cloak of ash fluttered in the wind as the saint's power made the city quake. Magos Uryx stood beside her, his mechadendrites twitching with fervor. Do you see it? He hissed. A living god machine. We cannot destroy it, we must master it. Seraphine turned to him, plasma pistol raised. You will master nothing but your own heresy, Magos. But before she could fire, the saint's gaze turned upon their spire. His eyes burned like molten suns, locking on her presence. Witness me, he thundered. His flail swung upward, smashing into the spire's base. The entire tower shook, splitting apart as stone and steel cascaded downward. Seraphine leapt as the structure collapsed, her boots catching the edge of a ruined bridge. Uryx fell beside her, clinging with his mechadendrites, his vox voice hissing with laughter. Yes, yes, even in rage, he answers. Do you not see, Inquisitor? He knows me. Seraphine spat blood, dragging herself upward. No Magos, he knows prey. The Deathwatch fought on, but their strength was waning. For every zealot slain, 10 more replaced them. For every construct shattered, the Manufactorums birthed 2 more. The Iron Saint was not simply a foe. He was a force of nature, a god machine walking with the faith of thousands. And yet for all his might he bled. Where Kraken rounds pierced, sparks and blood mixed, where chain axes struck, wires and sinew tore, he was mortal, entombed within his cathedral of iron. Kaelus raised his helm to Seraphine across the battlefield. She nodded once. They both knew what must come next. The Iron Saint raised his flail again, roaring as fire belched from his braziers. His zealots screamed in worship, and the world seemed to tremble at his every movement. But even gods can fall. The Inquisitor's hand tightened on her plasma pistol. The Deathwatch regrouped, their circle tightening, their chants rising. The final strike against the Iron Saint had not yet come, but already the first seeds of his doom were being sown in the fire and blood of Caldris IX. And the march continued. The plaza of Caldris IX was a graveyard of smoke and blood. The Deathwatch held a crumbling perimeter amid heaps of zealot corpses and twitching machine things. The air was thick with static hymns, broken only by the thunder of the Iron Saint's march. From the ruins of the spire, Inquisitor Seraphine crawled onto a broken causeway, her cloak shredded, plasma pistols sparking. Beside her, Magos Uryx rose with mechanical ease, his mechadendrites pulling him upright, lenses glowing with something disturbingly close to joy. The Iron Saint loomed in the distance, his massive form silhouetted against burning manufactorums. Even wounded, he strode like a god across the ruins. You see him falter, Seraphine spat, blood on her lips. He bleeds, he is mortal. Uryx turned his metal face toward her, vox grill vibrating in a tone that bordered reverence. He bleeds because his flesh is imperfect, but with my hand, that imperfection can be erased. As the Deathwatch regrouped below, Uryx's true intentions began to surface. For years, he had searched for fragments of forbidden SDC patterns. On Caldris IX, he had found them, patterns for a human-integrated god machine. The Iron Saint was no miracle. He was the product of Mechanicus hubris, a weapon built on flesh. It was my order that interred him, Uryx confessed, his vox carrying tones of pride. A general of the Astra Militarum, shattered but unbroken, his faith made him the perfect vessel. His mind was bound, his soul shackled, a prototype but flawed. Seraphine's eyes narrowed, her pistol rising. You did this. Uryx did not deny it. The Omnissiah is silent, Inquisitor, but I have given him a voice. With my guidance, The saint will not be our enemy, but our salvation. Uryx raised a hand, his mechadendrites unfurled, revealing sigil-stamped devices humming with energy. Binary cant burst from his vox, words too fast for human ears. The Iron Saint froze mid-stride, his burning eyes dimmed, his massive form locked as if seized by invisible chains. The zealots wailed, falling to their knees as their god halted. The Deathwatch, momentarily stunned, stared as the saint, who had seemed unstoppable, stood motionless, trembling like a beast caught in a snare. "You see," Uryx hissed, his arms wide. "He kneels, he knows his master." The saint bent one knee, his flail dropping with a crash that shattered buildings. His vox thunder became a broken whisper. Who commands me?" Seraphane's face hardened with fury. "You dare bind a soul like a servitor, you dare play God with flesh and iron, you are no magos, you are a heretic." She fired. The plasma bolt struck Uryx's chest, burning through a layer of armor. The magos staggered but did not fall. His mechadendrites snapped around, seizing the pistol, wrenching it from her grip. "You do not understand, Inquisitor," he said, his voice calm, almost pitying. "You see a monster, I see the future of mankind." At first, the saint knelt, his shield planted like a cathedral pillar, his massive frame bound by Uryx's command codes. But something stirred within the prison of steel. Through broken vox, a human voice screamed, not binary, not mechanical, but the voice of the man who had once been a general, a soul bound in torment. "No, not yours, never yours." The saint convulsed, metal plates buckling as his body fought against the Mechanicus programming. The chained corpses upon his chest writhed as if alive, their mouths tearing open in silent screams. Uryx's lenses widened. "No, no, obey, by my sigil obey." But the Iron Saint rose. The Vox Thunder became a roar of agony and rage. His chains snapped, not physically, but spiritually, as if faith itself had torn free from the Mago's circuitry. "I am no slave." His flail swung with the force of a god's wrath. The flail's chains struck the causeway. Seraphane leapt clear, but Uryx was caught. His mechadendrites lashed out, clinging desperately to broken stone, even as the saint's weapon dragged him screaming toward the abyss. "Wait, I made you. I am your master." The flail came down. Uryx was obliterated, his body smeared into molten fragments against the ferrocrete. Sparks rained from his shattered frame, his binary scream echoing as his machine spirit died. The zealots howled in ecstasy, their faith renewed. The saint stood tall again, his eyes burning brighter than ever. But now his voice was not one of prayer, it was a voice of vengeance. "You sought to chain me, you sought to silence me, but I am the saint of iron, and all shall burn." The Deathwatch faltered. They had hoped Uryx's control might weaken the saint, that perhaps he could be slain while bound. Instead, he had broken free stronger than before. Now the saint struck without care. Zealots, constructs, Deathwatch, all were equal in his wrath. His flail crushed a dozen zealots into paste, his shield smashed a manufactorum construct into dust, his foot came down upon a Deathwatch marine, cracking ceramite and bone in one strike. He was beyond ally or enemy, he was fury incarnate. Amid the carnage, Seraphane climbed to her feet. Dust and blood clung to her cloak, her eyes burning with grim resolve. She knew now the truth. The saint was not a miracle, not a tool, not even a man. He was a wound upon reality, a soul that could never be saved. But in his voice, she still heard humanity. "Kill me," the saint whispered beneath the thunder. For a heartbeat, only she heard it. "End me." Seraphane clenched her fists. To destroy him would be to end his torment, but to fail would doom the segmentum. She turned to the battered Deathwatch survivors. He is vulnerable. We strike together or we die here. Kalis spat blood and chambered another Kraken round. Then we die as sons of the throne. The Iron Saint roared, flames gouting from his braziers, his flail whirling in arcs of fire. Around him, the city collapsed under his fury. The Deathwatch prepared their final stand. The Inquisitor readied her charges. The Saint marched forward, every step a declaration of war. And above the screams, one truth burned clear: the last act was coming. The Iron Saint could not be bound, he could not be mastered, he could only be destroyed. Caldris IX was no longer a world, it was a pyre. The manufactorums burned like titanic furnaces, smokestacks toppled like broken spires, and the air was thick with ash and the smell of charred flesh. The Iron Saint walked through the inferno as though he had created it. His every step shook the ferrocrete. His every swing of the flail was a storm that ripped apart the landscape. Around him, zealots screamed prayers, only to be trampled underfoot when his wrath struck too wide. No more chains, the Saint thundered, his vox speakers shaking the ground. No more masters, only fire, only judgment. At his back, the corpses fused into his armor writhed like damned souls, their mouths opening and closing in silent agony. The surviving Deathwatch gathered on the skeletal remains of a collapsed manufactorum bridge. Their armor was shattered, their ammunition near spent, but their resolve was unbroken. Veteran Captain Kalis planted his blade into the ferrocrete, raising his voice over the flames. Brothers, today we do not fight for survival. We fight to buy the Imperium one more heartbeat. We strike not for victory, but for honor. The Deathwatch roared their assent. They were Astartes. They did not retreat. Beside them, Inquisitor Seraphine checked the seals on her melter charges. Her face was pale but steady. She knew the truth. This would end with her death or the Saints. There could be no coexistence. The Iron Saint turned toward them. His shield crashed down, sending a shockwave that shattered nearby ruins. His burning eyes fixed on the Deathwatch, and for a moment the battlefield seemed to hold its breath. "Children of the throne," he growled, his voice carrying the echo of the man he once was. "I fought beside you once, I bled for the Emperor, and yet you would end me now." Seraphine stepped forward, her voice ringing clear. "You are not his servant, you are his wound, you are pain given form. The Emperor asks not for endless torment, he asks for sacrifice, and now you must make yours." The Saint's laugh was a vox-distorted roar, filled with both sorrow and rage. "Then come, break yourselves upon me, and no despair." The Deathwatch struck first. Kraken rounds slammed into the Saint's armor, exploding with enough force to tear apart tanks. Chainswords revved, lightning claws crackled, and thunder hammers fell. The Saint's shield absorbed the storm. With one swing of his flail, he annihilated two Astartes, their bodies reduced to bloody ruin. With a backhand, he shattered a third, sending him spiraling into the flames. Kalis leapt upon the Saint's shoulder, his power blade stabbing into the glowing seams of the armor. Sparks erupted, but the Saint merely reached up and hurled him across the battlefield like a doll. "You are nothing," the Saint roared. "Your strength is dust, your faith ash." Amid the carnage, Seraphine darted forward, planting melter charges along the Saint's shield arm. Her agility, honed by decades of battle, let her slip beneath his swings, though each near miss was a hurricane of fire and shrapnel. She vaulted onto his chest, staring into the hollow sockets of the corpses fused into his armor. For a heartbeat, she swore she saw them begging. "Forgive me," she whispered. She armed the charges and leapt clear. The explosion tore through the saint's arm, vaporizing layers of steel. The shield, once indestructible, cracked and fell away in molten fragments. For the first time, the saint staggered. "Enough," he bellowed, his voice breaking into static rage. Unbound, unshielded, the saint's wrath became unstoppable. He swung his flail in a wide arc that collapsed an entire hab block. The shockwave hurled Seraphine into the rubble, her ribs shattering under the impact. Kalis charged again, his blade plunging into the saint's side. This time it bit deep, drawing a roar of agony that split the night sky. The saint backhanded him, breaking half his armor and sending him crawling in the dust. But the Death Watch pressed on. Power fists struck, chain swords carved glowing gouges in his armor, and every Kraken round found its mark. Piece by piece, they broke him down. And yet he endured. In the midst of his rage, the saint faltered. His massive frame knelt, not from defeat, but from something deeper. His vox crackled, and for a moment, the godlike roar fell silent. "Kill me," the voice whispered, not thunder, not rage, but a man's voice filled with pain. "End this, please." Seraphine, bleeding and broken, forced herself to stand. Her hand trembled around her bolt pistol. She had heard this plea before, in the spire, in his moments of weakness. "Do it," Kalis urged, his voice ragged. "While he falters." Seraphine raised her pistol. The saint's burning eyes locked onto hers, and for a moment she saw not a monster, but a soldier begging for release. She fired. The bolt punched through the saint's helm, exploding within. His head snapped back, fire gouting from the wound. The saint roared, not in rage, but in liberation. He dropped his flail, his massive frame trembling. The corpses upon his chest ceased their writhing. The braziers atop his shoulders guttered and died. The giant fell to his knees. Then, with a sound like a mountain collapsing, he crashed to the ground, lifeless. The battlefield went silent. The zealots wailed in despair, many collapsing in prayer, others fleeing into the ruins. The Death Watch survivors stood amid the wreckage, their armor shattered, their brothers dead. Seraphine limped to the corpse of the Iron Saint. She placed a bloodied hand upon the cold armor. "You are free now," she whispered. Kalis joined her, his voice low. "We have slain a god, and yet it feels like we have killed a man." Seraphine's gaze hardened. "Not a god, not a man, a warning. If ever again we forget that machines are not our masters, another Iron Saint will rise." She looked out across the burning world. "And next time, perhaps we will not survive." The flames consumed the horizon. The saint was dead, but his legend and the terror of what he had been would haunt the Imperium forever. When the Iron Saint fell, the battlefield did not erupt into cheers, nor did it echo with triumph. Instead, there was only silence. The kind of silence that comes not from peace, but from exhaustion, from the knowledge that nothing remains to give. The flames of Caldris IX still burned, consuming entire manufactorums and hab blocks, but without his will to sustain it, the inferno seemed smaller, mortal. The apocalyptic roar of his presence had ended, and what remained was a world choking on smoke, ash, and memory. The surviving Deathwatch warriors stood in a broken half-circle around his corpse, their armor cracked, their weapons ruined, their oaths fulfilled at a cost that none could measure. Captain Kalis leaned upon his blade, each breath a thunderous rattle inside his helm. He knew he had led many to their deaths, brothers who would never again hear the call of battle, but this was what it meant to serve. Beside him, Inquisitor Seraphine collapsed to her knees. Her body had become a ledger of pain, ribs broken, legs shattered, lungs filling with blood. And yet, she still pressed a hand to the Iron Saint's armor, as though trying to feel the soul of the man buried beneath the steel. "It is done," she whispered, but her voice carried no triumph. As dawn broke, the fires revealed the ruin. What had once been manufactorums that forged the Emperor's weapons were now heaps of slag. The spires had collapsed, their twisted frames jutting from the ground like the bones of giants. Imperial Guard regiments arrived, treading cautiously over the blackened ground. Their officers gazed upon the Iron Saint's corpse with awe and dread. Some dropped to their knees in reverence. Others spat, cursing his name as heretic. A commissar demanded his remains be destroyed at once. A tech priest countered, demanding they be preserved for study. Arguments flared like sparks. Seraphine silenced them with a single look. Her eyes, cold and unwavering, carried the authority of a woman who had stood in the heart of the storm and survived. "This is not a relic. This is a warning," she declared. "Burn it. Scatter the ashes so no forge, no shrine, no heretic can ever raise him again." The guardsmen obeyed, though their hands trembled as they set the pyres. It took hours for the colossal corpse to burn. The smell of molten adamantium and charred flesh rolled across the battlefield like a poisonous fog. The Death Watch stood vigil until nothing remained but ash and fragments of chain. In the days that followed, Seraphine convened with her peers through encrypted Vox channels. The Ordo Xenos, Ordo Malleus, and Ordo Hereticus all demanded her report. Each faction whispered of different truths. That the saint had been a demon wearing a man's skin. That he had been a Xenos construct disguised to corrupt imperial faith. That he had been a tech priest gone mad with forbidden law. Seraphine listened to them all and told them nothing. Her official report was clinical. On Caldris IX, a Heatech war machine was destroyed by the combined efforts of Deathwatch Kill Team Sigma and inquisitorial oversight. No relics of value remain. World quarantined until cleansing complete. Her private journals, sealed by crypt keys only she could access, told another story of a man whose faith had been twisted into chains, who had begged for release. The Inquisition buried the truth. Caldris IX was listed as a world purged of Heatech activity, not as the tomb of a saint. To speak of him was forbidden. And yet the whispers spread. Among the surviving guardsmen, stories spread of a giant clad in chains who fought like a god. Some claimed he was a martyr who had risen against the tyranny of the Inquisition. Others swore he had been a demon cast down by holy fire. On distant worlds, preachers began invoking the Iron Saint in their sermons, some as a warning, others as a beacon of faith misused. The ecclesiarchy, alarmed, denounced these stories as heresy. They sent assassins, censors, and preachers to silence those who dared repeat his name. But you cannot kill a whisper. In the dark corners of hive spires, in the silence of manufactorum shifts, the people spoke of him, a man of flesh and steel, chained by faith, who had begged for death. The surviving Deathwatch warriors returned to their watch fortress in silence. They had fought Xenos, demons, and Heatechs, but never something that had once been a brother-in-arms, twisted beyond recognition. Captain Kalis stood before the eternal flame of vigil and renewed his oath. "I will not allow another Iron Saint to rise. If ever again the Emperor's name is twisted into chains, I will strike it down, even if it wears the face of my kin." The other Deathwatch swore the same, their voices echoing like thunder in the vault. From that day forth, the Deathwatch carried a new burden, not just the Xenos without, but the corruption within. Seraphine never fully healed. Her body bore scars that no Medici could mend, and her nights were filled with dreams of burning chains and pleading voices. But her will did not waver. She became known within the Ordos as ruthless, unyielding, and merciless toward any who blurred the line between faith and madness. Her agents whispered that in private moments, she would sometimes kneel in silence, clutching a fragment of broken chain taken from the saint's armor. Not as a relic, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. Not all were satisfied with the saint's destruction. Within the hidden forges of Mars and beyond, whispers ran hot. How had a human-machine hybrid achieved such power? What secret had been discovered and buried? Some believed the saint's design had been seeded from SDC fragments. Others swore it was archaeotech fused with faith. The Adeptus Mechanicus filed endless requests to access Seraphane's sealed reports. Everyone was denied. And yet experiments began in secret, chains reforged, armors whispered into existence, faith given form in iron. Decades later, on a distant world at the edge of the segmentum obscurus, a guardsman stood before a fire, telling a story to wide-eyed recruits. They say once there was a saint of iron, a man so bound by chains of faith that he became a god of war. They say he fought the Deathwatch themselves, and when they struck him down, he begged for release. They burned his body, but his spirit still walks. Sometimes, in the smoke of a battlefield, you can hear the rattle of chains. The recruits shivered. One asked, "Is it true, Sergeant? Was he real?" The sergeant spat into the fire, his scarred face unreadable. In this galaxy, boy, every story's true somewhere. The question ain't whether he was real. The question is whether we'll see him again. Far across the stars, in a forgotten vault where forbidden relics were stored under stasis, a piece of broken chain rested in silence. Its metal was blackened, scarred by melter fire, meaningless to any who saw it. And yet, in the stillness, it trembled, just once, as though something within remembered.